The air in the opulent, mahogany-paneled study was thick with tension, barely masked by the faint scent of old money and expensive polish. Rain lashed against the tall, arched windows of the Sterling family mansion, mirroring the stormy atmosphere within. Elias Sterling, the patriarch, a titan of industry and a man known for his eccentricities as much as his immense wealth, had passed away 2 weeks prior at the ripe old age of 9. Now, his estranged family, a collection of avaricious relatives, gathered for the reading of his will, their eyes gleaming with thinly veiled anticipation, their polite smiles barely concealing their predatory hunger. Among them sat a figure who seemed utterly out of place. 16-year-old Maya. She was dressed simply in a dark, modest dress that felt too formal for her usual vibrant style, a hand-me-down from her older cousin. Her natural hair, usually a crown of intricate braids, was pulled back in a neat bun, a concession to her mother's insistence on looking presentable for the occasion. Her skin, the color of warm caramel, contrasted sharply with the pale, often flushed, faces of the Sterling family, whose complexions spoke of generations spent avoiding the sun. Maya was Elias Sterling's great niece, though most of the family barely acknowledged her existence. Her grandmother, Elias's sister, had been disowned decades ago for marrying a black man, a transgression the Sterling family had never truly forgiven, maintaining a cold, distant silence ever since. Maya had met Elias only a handful of times, brief, awkward encounters at family gatherings she'd been dragged to by her well-meaning but often oblivious mother. She felt like an intruder, a misplaced puzzle piece in a picture she didn't belong in, a silent observer in a drama of greed. The family lawyer, Mr. Alistair Finch, a man as stiff and unyielding as the legal tomes lining the walls, cleared his throat. His silver hair was meticulously parted, his suit impeccably tailored. He adjusted his spectacles and surveyed the room, his gaze lingering for a moment on Maya, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps a hint of wariness or anticipation, in his otherwise impassive eyes. You had known Elias Sterling for over 50 years and understood the old man's penchant for dramatic flair, even in death. "Good morning, everyone," Mr. Finch began, his voice dry and formal, resonating slightly in the cavernous room. "We are here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Elias Sterling." He paused, letting the weight of the name settle, allowing the family to stew in their expectations. As you know, Mr. Sterling was a man of considerable means, and his final wishes are, shall we say, quite specific. He left very detailed instructions regarding this reading, including the precise order of bequest. A ripple of nervous excitement went through the room, like a collective shiver. Elias's eldest son, Richard Sterling, a man whose face was a permanent sneer, etched there by years of entitlement and dissatisfaction, adjusted his silk tie, his eyes darting impatiently. His wife, Eleanor, a woman whose diamonds seemed to compete with the rain for sparkle, clutched her designer handbag, her knuckles white. Their children, entitled and bored, fidgeted in their seats, already envisioning their inheritance, mentally spending the millions they assumed were coming. Mr. Finch began to read, his voice droning through the legalese, a monotonous recitation of clauses and He detailed various charitable bequests, vast endowments to prestigious universities, and a few minor sums to long-serving staff. The head gardener, the personal chef. The family grew increasingly agitated, their initial excitement morphing into thinly veiled annoyance. Where was the real money? This was all just preamble. Surely, then, Mr. Finch reached a section concerning the family. He listed a few distant cousins, each receiving a modest sum, a mere pittance compared to Elias's vast fortune, barely enough to cover a year's worth of their extravagant lifestyles. Richard Sterling, his face reddening with indignation, finally burst out. "This is ridiculous, Alistair. My father wouldn't leave us scraps. This is an insult. Where's the main inheritance? The Sterling Corporation, the properties, the art collection, the offshore accounts." His voice rose to a roar, shattering the decorum of the room. Mr. Finch held up a hand, his expression unchanged, a master of calm in the face of chaos. "Patience, Richard. We are coming to the primary beneficiaries now. As I stated, Mr. Sterling's will is quite specific in its order." He adjusted his spectacles again, and his gaze, with an almost imperceptible shift, settled on Maya, a flicker of something almost sympathetic in his eyes. Maya felt a jolt of anxiety, a prickle of unease. Why was he looking at her? She had no expectations, no real claim to anything beyond a polite acknowledgement. Perhaps a small, symbolic sum. She just wanted to get through this awkward ordeal, escape the judgmental stares, and go home to her quiet life. "To my son, Richard Sterling," Mr. Finch read, his voice clear, "I bequeath my collection of antique pocket watches, a token of the time we spent together, and a reminder that true value is not always measured in currency." Richard gasped, a choked sound, then roared, his face contorted with fury. "Pocket watches? Are you insane, Alistair? This is a joke. He's playing games from the grave. He's humiliating me." He slammed his fist on the polished table, making the crystal glasses jump. Eleanor shrieked, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that grated on the nerves. This is an insult. After all we've done for him, all the years of putting up with his eccentricities, his constant demands. Mr. Finch ignored the outburst, his voice unwavering, cutting through the rising tide of indignation. To my daughter, Susan Sterling, I bequeath my collection of rare botanical prints, reflecting her purported passion for gardening and a gentle suggestion to cultivate something other than resentment. Suzanne, a perpetually aggrieved woman who had always complained about her father's perceived slights, threw her hands up in exasperation. Botanical prints. I need money, not dusty old pictures. This is a mockery. He always hated me. The room descended into a cacophony of outraged protests, accusations, and furious whispers. The Sterling family, accustomed to a life of unearned luxury and believing their inheritance was an absolute right, felt utterly betrayed, their sense of entitlement bruised beyond repair. They had expected millions, perhaps billions, and were receiving accompanied by thinly veiled insults from beyond the grave. Amidst the chaos, Mr. Finch's voice cut through the din, louder now, sharper, resonating with an unexpected authority. Silence. I remind you, this is the last will and testament of Elias Sterling. Any further outbursts, any further disrespect shown to the wishes of the deceased will result in your immediate removal from the premises and forfeiture of any previously mentioned by the threat, delivered with cold precision, finally quieted the room, though glares and muttered curses still flew like poisoned darts. Richard, breathing heavily, slumped back in his chair, his eyes blazing with impotent rage. Mr. Finch took a deep, deliberate breath, allowing the silence to settle, to build anticipation, and finally he announced, his gaze sweeping over the now pale and trembling Sterling family, then settling pointedly, almost dramatically, on Maya, who sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart pounding. To my great niece Maya stiffened, her heart pounding against her ribs. She braced herself for a polite dismissal, a small sum perhaps, a gesture of distant acknowledgement, a final, token nod to a forgotten branch of the family. She half expected some backhanded compliment or a veiled insult, a final reminder of her place. Richard Sterling snorted a loud, contemptuous sound that broke the tension. Maya Jenkins, what's she doing here? The illegitimate branch of the family tree, the charity case. What's he giving her? His old gardening tools, or maybe his worn-out slippers. His words were laced with open disdain, his eyes filled with a racist contempt that made Maya shrink in her seat, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Eleanor and the other relatives chuckled, their faces alight with cruel amusement, reveling in her discomfort. Maya felt her cheeks burn, a hot, stinging sensation that brought tears to her eyes. The humiliation was a physical ache, a familiar burden. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor, to be anywhere but here. This was exactly why she hated these family gatherings, these painful reminders of her perceived outsider status. Mr. Finch, however, did not acknowledge Richard's cruel remark. His eyes, fixed on Maya, held a strange, almost triumphant gleam, a subtle defiance that was entirely uncharacteristic of the usually staid lawyer. He took a deliberate pause, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of Richard's hateful words hang in the air, a stark contrast to the words he was about to read. Then, he began to read, his voice slow, clear, and utterly devastating to the Sterling family, each word a hammer blow. To my great niece Maya, whom I have watched grow into a young woman of unparalleled intellect, unwavering integrity, profound compassion, and a spirit untainted by the avarice and prejudice that has consumed many others of my bloodline. A collective gasp from the Sterling family, a sound of choked disbelief. Richard's face twisted in a silent snarl, his eyes bulging. Eleanor's jaw dropped, her perfectly made-up face paling. I bequeath the entirety of my remaining estate. This includes, but is not limited to, my controlling interest in Sterling Corporation, all real estate holdings, including this mansion and all other properties worldwide, my entire art collection, all financial assets, stocks, bonds, and trusts, and any other possessions, tangible or intangible, not previously specified in this document. Furthermore, I explicitly state that this inheritance is granted to Maya Jenkins freely and without encumbrance, and that any attempts by other family members to contest this will shall be met with the full force of my legal team and shall result in their complete and utter disinheritance from any and all future considerations, including any minor bequests previously mentioned. The silence that followed was absolute, profound, broken only by the incessant drumming of rain against the windows. The Sterling family sat frozen, their faces contorted in a grotesque mixture of disbelief, shock, and dawning horror. Richard's jaw hung slack, his eyes wide and unseeing, his mind unable to compute the magnitude of what he had just heard. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, a choked sob escaping her lips, her diamonds suddenly seeming dull and meaningless. The children, sensing the seismic shift, looked utterly bewildered, their childish entitlement suddenly replaced by a dawning fear. Maya, too, was stunned. Her mind struggled to process the words, to make sense of the impossible. The entirety of his remaining estate, everything, the Sterling Corporation. Billions. It was impossible. It had to be a mistake, a cruel, elaborate joke. Mr. Finch, observing the stunned silence, finally closed the will. Snapping the leather cover shut with a decisive thud, he removed his spectacles, polishing them slowly with a handkerchief. His gaze sweeping over the now pale and trembling Sterling family, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. In essence, he stated, his voice now crisp and direct, devoid of any legal jargon. Miss Maya Jenkins inherits everything. The Sterling Corporation, estimated at over $10 billion, is now hers. The properties, the assets, the entire fortune, it all belongs to Maya by the explicit and undeniable wishes of Elias Sterling. Richard Sterling, finally finding his voice, let out a strangled cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and rage. This is a travesty, a fraud, a trick. She's a child. Nobody. Black, nobody. He can't do this. This is illegal. He lunged forward, his face contorted with a mixture of fury and desperation, but was quickly restrained by Mr. Finch's security detail. Two burly men who had quietly positioned themselves around the room, anticipating such an outburst. Eleanor began to wail, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that pierced the air. My diamonds, my houses, my inheritance. This is a nightmare. We'll be ruined. Maya, still trying to grasp the reality of it, felt a strange mix of emotions. The intense humiliation she had felt moments ago, the burning shame of Richard's racist slurs, was now replaced by a profound sense of responsibility and a flicker of something akin to vindication. She looked at the Sterling family, their faces, now a grotesque caricature of greed and despair, their carefully constructed lives crumbling before their eyes, and saw them for what they truly were, hollow, entitled, and utterly undeserving of the legacy they had squandered. Mr. Finch turned to Maya, a genuine, if rare, smile touching his lips, a warmth in his eyes that had been absent moments before. Miss Jenkins, my deepest congratulations. Mr. Sterling had a profound respect for you. He saw something special, something truly worthy, a goodness and strength of character that others in his family willfully failed to recognize. He spent years observing you quietly, from a distance, and he was deeply impressed. He then handed her a thick, leather-bound folder. This contains all the necessary documents and my contact information. My firm will of course continue to manage all of Sterling Holdings' affairs under your direction, providing you with all necessary support and guidance. Maya took the folder, her hands trembling slightly, the weight of it suddenly immense. She looked at the Sterling family one last time, their hateful glares now mixed with desperate pleading, their faces contorted in a desperate, pathetic plea for mercy. Richard, still struggling with security, his voice hoarse, screamed, "You'll never get away with this, girl. We'll fight this in court. You'll lose everything. You don't know who you're dealing with." Maya met his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't shrink. A quiet strength, a newfound resolve, settled within her, solid and unwavering. She looked directly into Richard's furious eyes. "I think," she said, her voice clear and steady, surprising even herself with its calm authority, "that my great uncle knew exactly what he was doing, and I think he knew exactly who he was dealing with." As the Sterling family was forcibly escorted from the mansion, their furious shouts and Eleanor's hysterical wails echoing down the grand hallway, Maya remained in the study, the rain still falling outside. She looked at the will, then at the vast, silent room filled with the legacy of a man. She barely knew a man who had seen something in her that his own family had willfully ignored, a man who had chosen character over bloodline. The weight of her new reality settled upon her, daunting yet exhilarating. Over the next few weeks, the news exploded. Black teenager inherits billionaire's fortune, disinherits entire family. The story captivated the nation, becoming a symbol of poetic justice, a powerful narrative against prejudice and entitlement. Maya Jenkins, the quiet, unassuming teenager, was suddenly thrust into the global spotlight, her face on every news channel, her story a viral sensation. She handled it with a maturity that belied her years, guided by Mr. Finch and a team of ethical advisors assembled by Elias Sterling himself, long before his passing. Maya began to navigate the complex world of Sterling Holdings. She learned quickly, absorbing information like a sponge, demonstrating an innate business acumen, a sharp analytical mind, and a keen understanding of people that surprised everyone, except perhaps Elias Sterling himself, who had recognized her potential years ago. Her first acts as the new owner were transformative, sending shockwaves through the corporate world. She didn't seek revenge, but she certainly didn't forget the humiliation she had endured. She initiated a comprehensive no-holds-barred audit of Sterling Corporation, uncovering years of questionable practices, environmental negligence, unethical labor conditions, and systemic corruption that Elias, in his later years, had been too frail or too trusting to oversee. She fired corrupt executives, replaced them with ethical leaders chosen for their competence and integrity, and implemented sweeping reforms focused on sustainability, social responsibility, and employee wealth, prioritizing people over profit. She established a massive philanthropic foundation in Elias Sterling's name, but with a clear progressive mission: to fund educational opportunities for underprivileged youth, particularly in STEM fields, to support arts and cultural programs in underserved communities, and to foster community development projects in neglected urban areas, ensuring equitable access to resources. She ensured that her own community, the one she had grown up in, the one that had nurtured her, benefited directly and significantly from her newfound wealth, investing in schools, libraries, and local businesses. The Sterling family, true to Richard's promise, launched a bitter, drawn-out legal battle, challenging the will, claiming undue influence, mental incapacity, fraud, anything to reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs. They spent millions on high-powered lawyers, dragging Maya through a grueling public spectacle. But Elias Sterling, a shrewd and cunning man even in his old age, had anticipated this. His will was ironclad, meticulously drafted by Mr. Finch, leaving no room for doubt or legal loopholes. He had included specific clauses detailing his reasons for disinheriting his direct descendants, citing their greed, their lack of empathy, their discriminatory attitudes, and their general unworthiness of his legacy. The court cases were dismissed, one after another, leaving the Sterling family bankrupt and disgraced, their public image shattered, their once proud name now synonymous with avarice and failure. Maya, however, thrived. She transformed Sterling Holdings from a symbol of old-world corporate power and inherited privilege into a beacon of modern, ethical capitalism, a force for good in the world. She proved that wealth could be used for positive impact, that leadership could be compassionate and visionary, and that true value lay not in inherited privilege, but in character, integrity, and a genuine commitment to making a difference. She never forgot the sting of humiliation in that study, the cruel laughter, the racist sneers. But that memory, rather than festering into bitterness, became a powerful motivator. It fueled her desire to build a legacy that stood in stark contrast to the Sterling family's past, a legacy built on justice, equality, and opportunity for all. She had inherited everything, and in doing so, she had changed everything, not just for herself, but for countless lives she touched. And the family who had humiliated her, now living in obscurity and poverty, stripped of their former luxuries, could only watch from afar, consumed by regret and the bitter irony of their own downfall. A stark reminder that true wealth is not measured by possessions, but by the content of one's character.